In the history books, some stories are about steel and smoke, conquest and revolution. And some stories are a lot fluffier. Picture this, it's the summer of 1807, and Napoleon Bonaparte isn't just a general, he's the master of Europe. This is a military titan who brought emperors and kings to their knees. His ambition redrew the map, his armies were the stuff of legend, and his power felt absolute. So you'd think that if he were to face a humiliating defeat, it would come from a rival empire or a dagger in the dark, right? Wrong? His most bizarre beatdown came from a twitchy-nosed, cotton-tailed horde he was supposed to be hunting for fun. This is the story of how one of the greatest military minds in history was routed, not by men with muskets, but by an army of very, very hungry rabbits. To really get how absurd this whole thing was, you have to understand who Napoleon was at this exact moment. By July 1707, the man was at the absolute peak of his power. He wasn't just some successful general. He was the guy who stared down the ancient monarchies of Europe and made them blink. Just a few weeks earlier, he'd wrapped up the War of the Fourth Coalition with a crushing victory. He met with Tsar Alexander I of Russia on a huge, fancy raft built in the middle of the Neman River to sign the treaties of Tilsit. And these weren't just peace treaties. They were a complete reimagining of the European map. France and Russia, once enemies, were now allies, basically splitting the continent between them. Prussia got completely humbled, losing almost half its land and getting hit with massive fines. Napoleon was creating new kingdoms, putting his family and friends on thrones. His power radiated out from Paris, locking nearly all of Western and Central Europe into his system. He was like a new Charlemagne, an emperor forged in revolution, and his word was law. So just imagine the scene. Napoleon returns to his court, not just as a winner, but as the winner. The air around him is thick with victory. His generals are the most feared military leaders on the planet. His political power? Unmatched. He'd faced down Austria, Prussia, and Russia, and won. There was nobody left to challenge him. He was, for all practical purposes, the king of the world. So, in this moment of supreme confidence, what better way to celebrate than with a bit of aristocratic sport? A grand hunt. It was a classic move for rulers, a way to show they dominated not just people, but nature itself. He just didn't realize nature was about to bite back. With the ink on the treaties still fresh, Napoleon was ready to celebrate his new world order. The guy tasked with organizing the party was his trusted chief of staff, Marshal Louis-Alexandre Berthier. Berthier was Napoleon's right-hand man, the logistical genius who made the French army's campaigns possible. Having just been made a prince by Napoleon, Berthier was eager to impress his boss with a celebration to remember. The plan was simple, a huge outdoor lunch followed by a classic rabbit hunt on Berthier's own massive estate near Paris. But this wasn't just for kicks. In the fancy, formal world of European nobility, the hunt was a status symbol. It was a flex of wealth, power, and control. For a guy like Napoleon, who wasn't born into top-tier royalty, these kinds of displays were important for making his rule look legit. The hunt was supposed to be a relaxed, symbolic day where the conqueror of Europe could chill with his top officers. Berthier, being the master of logistics he was, got right to work. A fancy meal was planned, invitations were sent to the top brass, and the grounds were prepped. Everything was perfect, except for one tiny detail. Berthier's estate, as grand as it was, didn't actually have many rabbits. And a rabbit hunt without rabbits is really just an armed walk in the woods. This was a problem, and Berthier was a problem solver. He gave his staff a simple order: get rabbits. Get a lot of them. He wasn't a man who did things by halves. Sources say he wanted anywhere from a few hundred to maybe even 3,000 rabbits for the emperor's entertainment. An aide was sent to round them up from local farmers. It seemed like a minor errand, a footnote in the grand plan. But that simple task was based on a catastrophic mistake that would turn a royal celebration into an absolute mess. A successful rabbit hunt works because of one simple fact. When a wild rabbit sees a bunch of loud humans with guns, it runs for its life. That instinct is what makes it a sport, the chase. Wild rabbits are naturally jumpy and see people as predators. That's the key thing Berthier's men completely missed. The aide sent to get the rabbits didn't go out trapping wild ones. Why would he? That would take forever. He took a shortcut. He bought them. He went around to local farmers and purchased their entire stock of rabbits, cage after cage. And that was the fatal error. As General Thibault, who was there, later wrote in his memoirs, the man wasn't aware that there could be any difference between one rabbit and another. The rabbits he bought weren't wild. They were domesticated. And that one detail changed everything. Domesticated rabbits, bred by people for food, have totally different instincts. They don't see a person and think predator. They see a person and think dinner time. For them, a human means food is coming. Cabbage, carrots, the good stuff. They're hardwired to run towards people, not away from them. To make things even worse, the hundreds, maybe thousands of rabbits were gathered and kept in cages on the edge of a field, waiting for the big day. In the chaos of setting everything up, nobody remembered to feed them. So now the stage was set, not with a bunch of terrified prey ready to scatter, but with a massive, hungry army of tame animals who had spent their entire lives thinking humans were basically walking vending machines. As Napoleon and his decorated generals strolled onto the field after breakfast, they were in high spirits, ready for some sport. They saw the cages and looked forward to the thrill of the chase. They had their riding crops and servants, all the ceremony of an imperial hunt. They had no idea they weren't the hunters. They were about to be the hunted. The moment came. The air was buzzing with excitement. On Berthier's signal, the cage doors flew open. Napoleon and his guests raised their hunting rifles, ready for the action. For a split second, it looked like it was going to plan. The rabbits came out. But then, something went very, very wrong. Instead of scattering away in fear, the rabbits just paused. They saw the most powerful men in Europe standing right there. And then, as one, the entire colony turned and charged directly at Napoleon Bonaparte. At first, people laughed. It was hilarious. A sea of fluffy bunnies hopping, not away, but towards them. But the laughter died pretty fast as surprise turned into disbelief, and then to actual alarm. This wasn't a friendly greeting. It was a relentless, unified attack. These rabbits weren't playing. They were starving. General Thibault's memoirs describe total chaos. The rabbits, he wrote, first gathered in small groups and then charged as a single body. They swarmed the emperor and his men, a living tide of fur. They started climbing up Napoleon's legs, nibbling at his boots. The master of battlefield tactics had no idea what to do. He tried batting them away with his riding crop, but for every rabbit he knocked back, 10 more surged forward. His men, hardened veterans of Europe's bloodiest wars, were just as useless. They grabbed sticks, used their rifles like clubs, and the coachmen even cracked their whips. But nothing stopped the furry onslaught. The attack was so thick and wild, they couldn't even shoot without risking hitting each other. The historian David Chandler adds an even crazier detail to the legend, writing that the rabbits showed a finer understanding of Napoleonic strategy than most of his generals. In a move that looked eerily strategic, the rabbit horde reportedly split into 2 wings, flanking the hunting party to cut off their escape and swarm Napoleon's imperial coach. It was a total, humiliating rout. The situation was, as Thibaut put it, a demeaning farce. Napoleon, the conqueror of conquerors, was completely overwhelmed. The memoirs say the rabbits piled themselves up between his legs till they made him stagger. There was only one thing to do: run. Beaten and embarrassed, Napoleon fled. He scrambled for his carriage, but the rabbit army was right behind him. As he jumped inside, some of the most determined attackers leaped in with him, and he had to physically toss them out the window as the carriage sped away. The attack only stopped when the coach was finally out of range, leaving the victorious rabbits in control of the field. As Napoleon's carriage tore down the road, with the occasional rabbit still being thrown from the window, you can imagine a stunned silence fell over the field. A silence that was probably quickly broken by roars of laughter. The most powerful men in France had just watched their invincible emperor get chased off by his own lunch. The only one not laughing? The host, Alexandre Berthier. His perfect party, meant to honor his emperor, had blown up in the most ridiculous way possible. His face must have been a picture of horror and shame. It didn't take long to figure out what went wrong. The truth came out. Berthier's guy had bought tame farm rabbits, not wild ones. These animals, cooped up and hungry all day, saw Napoleon and his fancy friends not as hunters, but as giant walking goodie bags. They weren't attacking, they were rioting for food. As General Thibaut dryly put it, the laughter which this revelation elicited may be guessed. The story of the rabbit battle quickly became a legend in Napoleon's inner circle. While they were probably told to keep it quiet to protect the emperor's image, a story this good was impossible to keep secret. It became a private joke, a whispered tale that hilariously undercut Napoleon's carefully built aura of invincibility. Napoleon's own reaction, once he got over the shock, was apparently amusement. He was a man who could appreciate good strategy, after all, even from a fluffy horde. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter. No territory was lost. No power shifted. Berthier kept his job, though the story probably haunted him forever. But the incident serves as a wonderfully humanizing moment for a man who was becoming more myth than human. It was a perfect, comical reminder that even the master of Europe wasn't immune to the universe's sense of humor. He could topple empires and command armies, but on one sunny afternoon, he was completely outsmarted by a bunch of hungry bunnies. The story of Napoleon's chaotic retreat from a rabbit army never made it into the official histories. You won't find any grand paintings of the event or statues of the victorious bunnies. It's an odd little footnote in a life filled with world-changing battles and massive political reforms. And yet, the story has stuck around for over 2 centuries, passed down in memoirs and retold by historians with a smile. It's become a classic of weird history and a favorite for anyone who loves how strange the past can be. Why do we still tell this story? Because there's something deeply satisfying about seeing the powerful get humbled by the totally ordinary. The image of the great Napoleon, a man who terrified a continent, running for his carriage from a fluffy mob, is just comedy gold. It's a moment of pure slapstick in an era of high drama. The whole thing is a perfect lesson in hubris. Napoleon set out to show his power over nature, and nature, in its cutest and cuddliest form, turned the tables on him. So the legacy of the bunny battle isn't about politics or war, it's about perspective. It makes a figure who seems like a giant in history books feel like a real person. A person who, sometimes, got into utterly ridiculous situations. Napoleon Bonaparte would lose his final decisive battle at Waterloo 8 years later, but you could argue his most humbling, and definitely his most bizarre, defeat happened on that grassy field in 1807. It's a timeless reminder that history isn't always serious and grand. It's messy, unpredictable, and often hilarious. And sometimes, even the greatest conquerors can be stopped in their tracks by the smallest and most unexpected enemies. From the height of imperial power to a frantic retreat from a furry mob, Napoleon's rabbit fiasco is a story that feels almost too weird to be true. It just goes to show that some of history's best moments are hidden in the footnotes. No amount of power or planning can control everything, and sometimes the difference between a stately celebration and a humiliating disaster is just a matter of buying the wrong kind of rabbit. If you enjoyed this bizarre moment from history, make sure to like and subscribe for more weird and wonderful stories from the past. And let us know in the comments, what's the most unbelievable historical event you've ever heard of? We'd love to read your stories.